have rarely been so pleased with roadworks on the A1 and the M1, because ticking along at 50 miles an hour, limping this car home, which is what I'm doing, doesn't look so out of place when you're in the roadworks. You don't feel like you've got lorries hugely up behind you, threatening to just plough you out of the way. So yeah, here we are, we're on the A1. I've got about 25 miles to go. I've managed to cover a few miles since I last talked to you, but yeah, about 25 miles to go. And the conclusion I'm coming to is that the fuel injection system, the whole fuel delivery system, is fucked. I've been thinking as I'm driving and watching the moment when it fails, because it has failed about another 3, it might be 4 times since I last spoke to you. Thinking about the mechanism of failure. The turbos on these spool up, if I remember correctly, the vacuum on the variable vane technology that these turbos use spools up at about 1800 RPM, I believe, or it might be higher than that, it might be 2,500, but in that order. And what I've found is that if I allow the revs to drop down to 2,000 RPM, regardless of what gear I'm in, then when I touch the throttle next, it will start chugging. Then I'll get the fuel injection system error, and then it will die. And the reason it's dying, I know this from reading the manual, the technical manual, is that the ECU measures the pressure of the low pressure side of the high pressure fuel pump and also the high pressure side. And I believe it also measures the pressure in the return. So if it sees the fuel pressure on the low pressure side of the high pressure fuel pump drop, it will put the engine into a limp mode, low power mode. There's no restricted revs, but there's restricted performance. If the fuel pressure continues to drop on the inlet to the high pressure fuel pump, then it actually kills the engine. And the reason it does that is to protect the engine from predestination and sucking in air without fuel and doing all those sorts of things. And what I'm experiencing is that we go driving, I let the revs drop down a little bit too low, the car splutters, which is a sign of it actually running out of fuel, not having enough fuel to keep the engine going. A moment later we get the fuel injection system fault, and a moment after that we get an engine shutdown. You pull over to the side of the road, inevitably, turn the engine off, turn the key to position 2, like engine on but not started, hold it there for 20 seconds, turn it off, turn it back on, 20 seconds, turn it off, back on. And what you would have done is allowed the low pressure side of the fuel system to charge the pressure in the pipes and the filter and everything up to the pump. Then you can start it, and it's fine for a while. I've also found and I think this is to do with the power output curve of the engine. The power output curve of the engine doesn't really pick up until around 2000 RPM. So if you let the engine revs drop below 2000 RPM and put your foot down, then what happens is the engine has to dump lots of fuel into it, but without the turbo helping it, because the turbo hasn't spooled up, and the fuel system at the moment can't deliver that fuel, so it immediately triggers this this cascade of failures. So what I've done is I've knocked it down into sport mode, and the sport mode on these 5-speed gearboxes, the GM gearbox that was supplied with these M57 engines on these early L322s, when you put it into sport mode, it changes the gearbox mapping and the engine mapping slightly, but it also doesn't use 4th gear. And so that allows me, like right now, I'm doing 55 miles an hour and the engine's running at about 2,600 RPM, which, if it had kicked into 5th, 2,500 RPM is about 70 miles an hour, not 55. Now, traffic isn't letting me go that fast, and I might find if the traffic did, I could knock it into 5th and I could cruise at 70 and it would be fine. And that's because the power curve is in the right place. You're on the steep part of the curve, which means the engine's running at its most efficient. It's sipping the fuel and producing lots of power from it. Whereas that transition, when the turbo isn't really working through to the moment it is working, particularly if you boot it at 1800, 2000 RPM, turbo hasn't spooled up, engine dumps loads of fuel in, tries to, the system can't deliver it, and it goes into fault mode. So here we are with about 20 miles to go, and I'm managing to keep it going without having to pull over at the moment, which is good news, because I was getting quite bored of diving for the hard shoulder, hazard lights on, stop the engine, prime up the fuel system, prime up the fuel system, prime up the fuel system, start it, pull out, drive 3, 4, 5 miles, do the same thing again. So I'm quite pleased. Hopefully, I don't suppose we're going to get all the way back without having to do it again, but I am actually hoping that I can get most of the way home without having to do it again. As the miles tick down, I become more optimistic, which is a good place to be. Otherwise, the car is doing just fine.